Getting ready to do a show, folks. Dr. Bill is on the way. And I'm on. This is Dr. Bill, your radio MD, on a lovely, well, I don't know if it's going to be lovely or not, but a hot and muggy 4th of July weekend in the Tampa Bay area. And we're doing a show. We got Ken and me and music and flags. And what else we got, Ken? We got some fireworks today or no? Yeah, yeah. I went out and the dogs were all howling and hiding. No, but what are you going to do? It's once a year. Yeah, I bought some fireworks. I'm sure my neighbors are going to yell and scream. And I don't know about that, but I'm gonna see what I can get away with. Let me put it like that. So I spent yesterday setting up. We're having our 4th of July party at the clubhouse tomorrow. And so I set up the sound system and the video and all that so we can stream it. And people who are not here, because it's a community of I would say about a third to a half of the people are part-time. They come down in the winter and escape the cold up there in the frozen tundra, Chicago and New York and places like that. So, but I got all that set up, and boy, I'll tell you what, Ken, that TV's getting heavier and heavier to carry up there. We ordered a TV, but we haven't gotten it in yet for the clubhouse, so I had to haul up my 46-inch LED. Oh my God, hard on the neck and back, dude. What, it's hard for me to ask for help. My mother harped on me. Now, Billy, I'm not going to be around forever, so you'll have to learn to take care of yourself. And that every time I go to do something, that's in the back of my mind. I got to do it. Nobody else is going to do it for me. I know that's probably. You won't even show up for your appointments. Yes, it is. It's Roger's fault. He probably crapped out on you, so you had to do the news. Oh. Yet, for those of you who don't know, Roger P. Schulman is the long-standing newsman at the Salem broadcasting stations here in the area, and he's been there about 100 years now. I think he got there right after Marconi invented radio, and yeah, and he's a nice guy. He's come and talked to me a few times and calls me every now and then for some input on medical matters. Speaking of which, one of my patients and friends and listeners asked me if I would do something on health care for older people and what our leading causes of death were and how we can prolong our lives. And so I thought I'd give a little bit of time today, and then in the second half of the show we'll go into the little bit about the Constitution, not the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence. My bad. And yeah, now here's the thing, Ken. Do you know who died on this day, and not this day, tomorrow in 1825? What famous Americans? We did. Do you know who they are? Yeah, and Jefferson did survive a few hours longer. Adams was our oldest living president until this current era. He was 89 years old. I think Gerald Ford lived into his 90s, and I think George Bush Sr. lived into his 90s, or 89 or 90, but we've had a few that have lived a little bit longer than Adams, but Adams was still a pretty old guy when he died. 89's not bad. No, that was particularly during the late 1790s when the Democratic Republicans and the Federalists were on the outs. The Adams and Jefferson and Hamilton, that gang, they wanted to form a fairly strong central government to hold the states together. And of course, Adams did not want us to get into the war between Napoleon and the Europeans, the Northern Europeans and the English. And so we actually ended up in what was called the Quasi-War in the late 1790s. And Adams built up one of the largest navies in our history. He had several hundred ships of various sizes. And we ended up fighting the French in the Caribbean, having some sea battles with them. But he was able to keep us out of what was actually a world war. It involved Africa, Asia, Europe, North America, South America. So it was a big deal. Well, you have to remember now that the French were kind of tardy in coming over, and the Founding Fathers, for the most part, never ever really wanted to not be English. They just wanted to be independent. So there's a big difference. And, Hamilton predicted that Napoleon would rise, that there would be a Caesar, a dictator that would come out of the French Revolution. And the French Revolution, the day of celebration for that is the 14th of July, which is Bastille Day. But Hamilton predicted correctly that it would end in disaster, it would end in a dictatorship, and of course Napoleon crowned himself emperor. And we saw that painting at the Louvre when we were there. And by the way, Ken, we'd taken Zeke to a Burger King or burger joint, so we had his little crown, and I said, "Give me that." And there's this whole crowd of people that are out in the hallway there looking at the picture, and I ran up and I put it on my head, started to put it on my head, just like Napoleon was putting the crown on his head, and my wife runs up and tries to grab it away from me. And it looked like it looked like the cardinal was trying to take the crown away from. We snapped a picture of it. The whole crowd was laughing. They loved it. Myung was upset with me. But that's life. What are you going to do? We had fun. You got to have fun in life, Ken. And that's probably the number one thing I would say as we get older. Is it's good, and keep your attitude positive. The people I see living into their late 90s, active, positive attitudes. I had one guy lived 105, and he was still doing a real estate deal 3 months before he died. From his bedside, in the hospital. I hear a phone ringing, Ken. I know, somebody answer that damn thing. At any rate, so here's the leading causes of death as we get older, over 65. Of course, heart disease is still on the top, but it's been going down over the past couple of decades, 3 decades, because of good interventions, stents, and angioplasty, and of course the statin drugs and the antihypertensive. So the two things I say that will make you live longest if you do have high blood pressure and high cholesterol are either an ACE or an ARB for your blood pressure and a statin, like simvastatin or rosuvastatin or pravastatin, one of the statin drugs. And so these are the things that will protect your blood vessels in your heart and help you live longer. So heart disease is still a big deal, but it's gone down considerably in the past couple of decades. And cancers, too, are going down, Ken. Death by cancers are going down. So we've got those two as still the main killers as we get older at 23% and 21% of the total deaths. You got to die of something. I mean, I'd rather die of a heart attack in my sleep than anything else, but... or the wife shooting me. Just make sure you do a clean headshot, baby. So that's all I ask. If you're going to do it, do it. And then accidents still remain a big problem. And what we see a lot are people falling off of ladders, getting in and out of cars, tripping on carpeting, tripping over furniture, and breaking a hip. And that's not a good thing, especially when we're in our 80s. That can be a fatal event. That can lead to a downward spiral where you're not active as you usually are. You're not up and about, and you can get pneumonia. And that they used to call pneumonia the old man's friend, or the old people's friend, because it would take their lives when they were suffering. So, and that's actually chronic lower respiratory diseases are also a big cause of death in seniors. And that includes things like emphysema and chronic bronchitis. And of course, you know how to prevent that, Ken, don't you? And do you know anybody who smokes? There'll be a test after this. There's a quiz afterwards. And then, yeah. And then the next thing is cerebrovascular disease, blood vessel disease of the brain, that both large vessel, like strokes, where you flick a clot off of your carotid artery into your neck and it gets lodged in a major artery in your brain, and also small vessel disease, where the little blood vessels that have divided down multiple times into the deep parts of the brain start to clog off with age, high blood pressure, diabetes, gout, high cholesterol, all the things that inflame blood vessels. autoimmune diseases like rheumatoid arthritis. And so what happens is these little blood vessels, they're actually feeding the tails of the nerve cells on the surface of the brain. You know, the gray matter. You know what that is? No, you don't. The gray matter, yeah, you can't remember. it's thin, yeah. So the gray matter is actually a gray-looking, very thin layer on the surface of the forebrain, the cerebrum, and these are the nerve cells that actually do all the work. They're active, and they're the thinking and the coordination and all that. And they have these long tails that go down into the brain and connect with other like switchboards. So what happens is the blood vessels on the surface of the brain are feeding the cells, and they're doing fine, but the tails also need some juice because they're so further down than the cell bodies. And so the small blood vessels, as they clog off, the tails start to die. And so we get what we call small vessel disease. It can cause dementia, balance problems, all kinds of problems, choking, sleep disorders. So that's a big deal too. And then following that is Alzheimer's disease, diabetes, then things like influenza and pneumonia, and suicide, surprisingly, rounds out the top 10. In this era, though, we had the COVID jump in there and take a spot. But I guess you could put that in with pneumonia and influenza. Basically, that's part of it. And that kind of boosted that up higher for a few years here. We'll see what happens. There's a lot of research going on, and there are proteins that are being identified, and I know there are some new drugs coming out. I think they're still in their research stage, in the clinical research, but we know that there are things that can help prevent dementia in the elderly, and one of them, believe it or not, is drinking alcohol. So I was reading the latest that came out from the CDC or the Lancet, or some organization that claims to know everything about everything, and they said, well, you should moderate your drinking to, I don't know, 20 drinks a week or something like that. And so I said, wait a minute, how do they know that? So I went and I read the literature. Guess what? If you drink moderately or moderately heavy, you decrease the incidence of dementia. So I felt better about that, Ken. I was like, yahoo! Well, yeah, I mean, look, what do you put in a mixed drink? A couple of ounces? Okay, so that's like 6 ounces of 40% alcohol, right? So that's going to be 2.4, 2.5 ounces of pure alcohol a day. And so let's say you drink 100 ounces of beer at 6%. So if you drink 8 beers a night, you're drinking, double the amount of mixed drinks. But if you're only drinking 4 beers, 5 beers, 6 beers, that's not a big deal. Unless you already have problems like high blood pressure or diabetes or liver disease, then drinking can become a problem. Drinking will push up your blood pressure. Now, I know you want to know this, and I know this is really a burning question for you in particular, is where do you get the most bang for your buck in treatment? That's right. You get it from treating high blood pressure, because that's still the major problem that leads to heart disease and brain disease and strokes and all that. And of course, smoking along with that is a bad thing, as I've pointed out to some of my friends over the years. Well, unless you quit smoking and then you can drink. And now, Now people say, well, what should my blood pressure be? And then of course the national bigwigs, they say 130/80. As we get older, though, our reflexes, our baroreceptor reflexes change. That's an autonomic, unconscious phenomena that occurs as when we stand up, our blood vessels constrict. This is a normal response to keep the blood from falling down into the legs and keep it up in the central part of the body. And otherwise, your blood pressure would drop and you'd pass out, or if you stayed upright, over a time period, you'd get swelling in your legs because the veins would engorge and there'd be pressure. You know, gravity pulls the blood down just like it pulls anything else down. So as we get older, though, the baroreceptors don't work like they used to. Our autonomic nervous system doesn't do what it's supposed to do. Things get older, and especially in people with small vessel disease of the brain. So I tell people, they say, well, my pressure's 150/80. And I say, well, we can go lower, but you may feel weak when you stand up. And sure enough, I have a lot of patients in their 70s and 80s who cannot tolerate a blood pressure of 130, Ken. So we keep it around 150 so that they perfuse their brain and they don't drop their blood pressure when they stand up. And how do you know if your blood pressure is over controlled? Well, if you feel okay lying down and then you stand up and you get kind of woozy and lightheaded and dizzy, could be that your blood pressure is over controlled. There's a lot of different medications we can use for high blood pressure, so there's a variety of choices, and if you don't like one, or it doesn't agree with you, or you don't agree with it, there's a number of other medications out there. We got a lot in our armamentarium now. That's pretty good for you, especially as a smoker. Yeah, no, I'm happy with that. Yeah, you know, we say 130/80, but if you can get a little lower, that's better. But if you feel weak when it drops down, then stay where you are. 140 is the old standard. Now we're down to 130. You know, they keep dropping it on us every time we get to, you know, you reach a milepost, and then these national committees on blood pressure and cholesterol, they drop it on you again. And then these guys come along and start saying, you got to cut down on your drinking too. Well, that's where I draw the line. That's not going to happen. Not the booze. The cigarettes are gone. So how long do we live now? You know? That's right. So in the United States, this is from a year or two ago, both sexes at age 65 live an average of 19.6 more years. That's about 20 years. The women live longer, 20.8, and the guys 18.2. And there's also a socioeconomic factor and a racial factor to this, Ken. Actually, Hispanic Americans, non-black Hispanic Americans, live longer than white Americans. And, of course, the Asian Americans outlive us all. Dang, that woman's going to bury me. I don't know. What can I do to make it even, Ken? Well, they're holier and purer, and they're nicer. And now, I had one of my no, they're not out cleaning the gutters. And one of my professors, my electrophysiology professor in my fellowship, he said his theory was that it has to do with the number of heartbeats and that men have a higher heart rate. And there are studies out that show that almost all mammals have the same number of heartbeats during their lifetime. And once they reach that magic number, whether it's a hummingbird beating at 200 or 300 or 500 beats a minute or whatever, or an elephant beating at 50 beats a minute, once you reach that magic number, you're toast, baby. So, yeah, well, you know, like I tell people, God gives you only so many fun credits. When you use up all those fun credits, dude, you're toast. Then he does that little finger waggle, come here, buddy, come on. So, but there is a disparity between the wealthy and the poor, and it's about 4 to 5 years. And there's a disparity between the races, as I said before, and it's actually fairly substantial with the Asian American population. They tend to live several years more than the rest of us. And I was surprised to read that the Hispanic Americans actually had a longer lifespan. Who knew? That's why we do the research for the show. I would. Well, they say the Mediterranean diet is helpful because it's high in unsaturated fats and antioxidants and all that, and the wine. But I don't know. I have no idea what the actual etiology of that is, but it sounds good. And so, if you want to live longer, you can become an Asian American or an Italian American. Eat more pizza, eat more rice and kimchi, and there you go. So now we know who lives longest, and actually, the wealthier you are, the longer you live. That's probably a combination of you take better care of yourself overall, you have better health care, and there is a disparity, not a big disparity, but there is a disparity between people with insurance and without insurance. And there's also got to be a disparity between people like me who can manage their own medications and who can order medications cheaply because we have our wholesale pipeline for our pharmacy. Our pharmacy is for the Canadians, we dispense some drugs to the Canadians and make a little extra money there. But I can see why there would be differences. You know what else makes a difference? Dental care. Yeah, dental care. You have a higher risk of dying with poor dentition. And we see that in heart disease and in a number of other diseases, including infections and pneumonias and so on and so forth. So you got to take care of your teeth, got to keep your blood pressure down, no smoking, get that cholesterol under control, and if you're diabetic, take care of that. And one of the big problems in the black population is high blood pressure. There is a genetic predisposition, and so the incidence of problems with hypertension are greater in the black community, and there's more, percentage-wise, more black Americans on dialysis for kidney failure and deaths from kidney failure than in the white population, and that's largely because of high blood pressure and kidney diseases related to high blood pressure. Of course, the diabetes adds to that too, and there's a higher incidence of diabetes in the black and in the Asian population. Asians, including my wife, North American Indians, Native Americans, whatever you want to call them, Koreans that got lost and ended up over here 15,000 years ago. Yeah, well, they like to wander. They really do. The Mongolians have wandered all over the world. They're interbred with almost every race on the planet, and that's okay. I like that. I find that fascinating. I'm delighted to be married to somebody who is so adventuresome and has such a spirit. So, what do we worry about, Ken? Well, we worry about cognitive decline. Am I getting demented? Am I forgetting things? Well, yeah. Are we on the air now? I can't remember. Yeah, and I think that we get busy too, and as we get older, we get busier, and when you're busy, you forget things. But a lot of us have small vessel disease as we age, and that does interfere with our cognitive abilities. And so cognitive decline is a very serious concern of older people. Balance issues and falling. That's a big deal. And we say 3 or more falls in 1 year significantly increases your risk of dying in the near future. 3 or more. Yeah, put the grab bars in and ask for help. That's the hardest thing for us to do as we get older, as I pointed out to you early in the show. And of course, oral health concerns, that's a big deal. Medicare Part A and B don't cover dental care. I think you can buy now some various parts or opt in for some various parts where you can get some dental care. And dental insurance has not been a big thing with the dentists. They haven't liked that. Some of them are starting to take it, and there's clinics out there that are taking it. Heart disease, and it's hard to convince people that if you don't take care of your blood pressure and your cholesterol, you're going to end up having a heart attack or a stroke. And I hear this over and over. I feel fine. I feel fine. I'm exercising. I'm doing everything. I've seen people with 90% blocked left main coronary, not left main, but left anterior descending coronary arteries, the widowmaker, still active. And they say, I don't think there's anything wrong with me. Then they have some atypical chest pain or palpitations, and we work them up, and they end up getting a stent or a bypass. Nobody can tell me what to do, dude. I think so, and I think that that's probably learned behavior, but I don't know, maybe testosterone too. Guys, we don't want to admit when there's something wrong a lot of times. And we don't complain as much, which ends up in an early death, but that's okay. Now, another big, and then I'll finish up on the health concerns real quick, and then we'll do something else in the second half. Go ahead with the question. Yahoo! Now, I wanted to finish up on just a couple of other major concerns for elderly people. Is osteoarthritis and osteoporosis. You got to take care of that. And remember, weight-bearing activity destroys your joints. Jogging was a big deal in the second half of the 20th century because Bannister broke the 4-minute mile. But really, that's not good for your joints. So swim, ride a bicycle, ride a stationary bike, low-impact aerobics. And of course, lung disease, COPD, and Ken can tell us all about that. Influenza and pneumonia, so get your vaccinations, and vision and hearing loss. Ken, and with that, let's go grab a cup of joe. I'm Dr. Bill. I'll be right back. And I'm back. This is Dr. Bill. Are you there, Ken? Oh, isn't he wonderful? He was. That's right. That's right. And he he wrote some great songs too, some great marching songs, and I think he invented the tuba. Fascinating, nice, nice, very sweet. And thankfully we have him as ours. He's an American. But yep. But John Locke was not an American. He was an Englishman. I think he was actually Scottish, and he was a philosopher in the late. He was 1632 to 1704, and he was the person who argued for the inalienable natural rights of people and the right to rebel against an abusive government. Did you know that? No, they stole all that from other people, and actually, a lot of the phrases and the wording of the Declaration of Independence had been floating around among the founding fathers for 10, 15 years, and letters back and forth between different members of the founding group. And well, yeah, there should be, but this is why I talk about it, so that people can learn this. And the George Mason, he was the one who called for a Declaration of Rights in the Virginia legislature, and that was passed. And he ended up also being instrumental in the Bill of Rights and writing the Bill of Rights. And if you ever go to Washington, D.C., and you're near the Jefferson Memorial, if you walk across the street, there's a really nice little sitting, well, it's not little, it's a huge semicircular sitting area, and in the middle of it is George Mason. He's just sitting there, so you can sit down and have a conversation with him. It's pretty cool. No, that was his. Mason was a common English name back then. So he was not I'm sure he was a Mason. Most of the founding fathers were members of the Masonic Lodge, but I don't think. Yeah, he was a lawyer. So the Declaration of Independence, it has several parts: the natural rights of man, the list of grievances against the crown, the declaration that we're independent from you, and then the kind of flipping the bird to King George. Really, I mean, basically, they had tried since 1760 to come to terms with the crown and with Parliament, and the only thing that the Americans wanted, the colonials wanted, Ken, was they wanted to have the right to vote. Did you know that? That was the main grievance. And after the French and Indian War, the 7 Years' War in Europe, the taxes went up, and things were a little edgy, and the American colonials said, wait a minute, we didn't get to vote on this. How come you're taxing us without representation? And then there was some minor rebellions, and the king moved troops into Massachusetts, especially into the Boston area, and that got everybody upset. And they said, look, Dad, we just want to say, if we're going to pay rent, we want to say in household affairs. And Dad said, no, you're too young and immature. And so, being the good teenagers that we were, we picked up our guns and started shooting. And we've been doing it ever since. I don't know. His prime minister said the world has been turned upside down when Cornwallis surrendered at Yorktown. Did you know that? Yeah. And so we have sayings that came out of our Declaration of Independence, like unalienable rights, which means that they can't be taken away. All men are created equal, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And these are all words that gained popularity because of the Declaration of Independence, and that people can set up a government to take care of these rights. And the unjust use of power by the crown and by a strong central government, and that's something that we have been fighting, and I think we're still in that fight, Ken, because we have the liberal left who wants a stronger federal government. They want to take over everything, and they want to get rid of the states. And so all of these things came to a head, and a committee was formed, a committee of 5, to write the Declaration of Independence. And that consisted of Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, Robert Livingston, Roger Sherman, and John Adams. John Adams played such a huge part in every aspect of our founding, whether it was the Declaration of Independence or the Constitution or the establishment of the military. He was the father of our first Navy, and he wrote the rules of conduct in war for the Continental soldiers. I mean, this guy was involved in everything, and he helped negotiate the first deal with a foreign power when he went to the Dutch and got a loan from there right after we gained our independence. So, tremendous guy. At any rate, Monticello. probably is, but I mean, he was a pretty modest guy. You know, he was a lawyer, and he didn't really do very well because he was so busy with the country. And but he did lead a modest life. That he was came off of a farm up in Massachusetts. But bright guy, oh my gosh! And if you ever read his biography, I mean, it is a tearjerker. It is just a tearjerker. What he sacrificed. Um, he lost one son to alcoholism, a daughter to breast cancer. It goes on, and he took his youngest son, John Quincy, with him on his second trip to Paris to be our legate. Legate, am I pronouncing it right? Legate to the French court during our ambassador to the French court during the Revolutionary War. And he was known as a pest to the king, but he eventually got it done. So at any rate, so these guys, the older guys, they turned to this young Turk from Virginia named Tom Jefferson. And Jefferson had a real flair for writing and speech. And they said, Tom, we're going to give this to you. You're the best writer among us. And here's all of our ideas. And so they gave all the ideas to Jefferson. And he put it together, and then he came back to the committee, and they made a few minor changes, and then they sent it forward on the 2nd of July to the Continental Congress, who made a couple of minor changes, put a few things in, took a few things out, and on July 4th they adopted it, and on July 5th they announced it, and they sent it to the printer. And one of the big questions is why didn't they include women? And Abigail Adams, John Adams' wife, had said, look, if you're really serious about having universal suffrage, then you got to include women. And of course, the guys weren't ready for that yet, I guess. No, they never got it in there because, as Washington pointed out, our first task is to put the country together, and we'll let later generations fight that out, but we'll neither recognize nor abolish it. But they did have the Three-Fifths Compromise because the South had such a smaller population that without including the slave population, they'd be way outvoted in Congress. So the South said, well, we want the Three-Fifths Compromise, which was one of the great compromises. It said that for every 5 slaves, you get 3 more votes. And, of course, I guess that meant a little padding of the... you added a few more slaves than were really there, so you get some more votes. And the other great compromise in the... I don't want to talk about the Constitution too much, but the other great compromise was the Senate. The Senate. And that equalized things out tremendously between the states. Otherwise, a lot of the states would not have joined the Union if it had just been the House of Representatives, because the big states, population-wise, would just do what they want without any concern for the little states. And the idea was to have some equality not only among the people, but among the states. And on this day, or actually on tomorrow, Frederick Douglass, the great black civil rights advocate and freed slave, who spoke through before and during the Civil War and after the Civil War, he delivered his speech at, I think it was at Buffalo, on July 4th in the 1860s, and he said, this is a day that white Americans celebrate, but not black Americans, because we don't have our independence yet. And then shortly after that, I think Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, and that kind of helped turn things around. And then, of course, we have the Juneteenth holiday now, Ken, because the Emancipation Proclamation in the 1860s, 1863, I believe it was, after Antietam. I think it was after the Battle of Antietam that he declared that, or Gettysburg. I can't remember which one. At any rate, it didn't get down to the slaves in Texas until sometime in the middle of June, and they weren't sure of the date, so they just said Juneteenth, somewhere between the 12th and the 20th. The third. Well, they didn't have, the cable hadn't gotten down there yet. And I think it was April when Lincoln issued that Emancipation Proclamation.
So what happened? What were the events that led up to this? Well, in January 1776, Common Sense was penned by Paine, and that went throughout the colonies, and that really stirred everybody up. And then Patrick Henry gave his little thing, "Give me liberty or give me death." You remember that? And then in June of 1776, Richard Henry Lee, one of the relatives of the great Civil War general, General Robert E. Lee, he said that these United States and the colonies ought to be free and independent. He entered that. He sent that as a resolution to the Continental Congress in June of 1776. And then in the same month, Congress appointed a committee to look into this and say, can we do this? To write a Declaration of Independence. And that's when Franklin and Sherman and Adams and Robert Livingston and Thomas Jefferson were appointed to this committee. And they said, yeah, we can do it, let's do it. Of course, in New York, they didn't want any part of it at that point. And they actually didn't sign on until after the Declaration had been written. They are difficult. And I was looking at the states where people live the longest, and the two states where people live the longest, supposedly, New York and California. But you know what we learned during the pandemic, Ken? The New Yorkers and the Californians, they lie about their health statistics. Like, can I believe this? And guess what state, or one of the states that has the second longest lifespan is? Florida, yeah. There you go. Even though we have a huge older population, we still have one of the longest lifespans of any state. So then on July 4th, everybody voted to send this thing out, and it went to the printers on the 5th or the 6th. And then on August 2nd, by that time, all the signers had signed. And you know why John Hancock signed so big? Well, that's what he said, but it was the custom of the day that the president of the committee, whatever it was, of the body or the corporation, he would sign big, and then everybody else who had to sign would sign underneath smaller. And we don't do that today because we're all, so egalitarian, so everybody gets to sign the same size. Although I like to write my name a little bit bigger. He did. And so we have now this wonderful document that was penned by Thomas Jefferson with the help of some other folks. And the ideas came from John Locke and other philosophers of the era. And so the Declaration, and some of the things that the colonials were upset about, as well as taxation and troops being stationed in Boston and other cities because of unrest and rebellion, were things like, you're not protecting us from the Indians. Did you know that? Yeah, that was one of the complaints. And another complaint was, you said if we fought and helped you with the French and Indian War, that we could settle in the lands between the Appalachians and the Mississippi. And more specifically, that would be Indiana, Ohio, Illinois, Wisconsin, Michigan, all that land. And the king changed his mind after the war was over in 1760. He said, no. He said, I got to save that for the Native Americans. And so the colonials were like, dude, these people fought against us. What, you're giving them the land? We don't like that at all. And really, they did. A lot of the Western, what were then to us the Western tribes between the Appalachians and the Mississippi, fought against us in the 1750s. I'm sorry, in the French and Indian War. They fought with the French. And then in the American Revolutionary War, guess who they fought with? The English. They fought for the English. Well, they played the politics and they picked the wrong side on both accounts. So people say, well, we took unfair advantage of them. Are you kidding? They were in the middle of it as much as anybody else. They just weren't well organized, and
And, people would say, well, they didn't have rifles. You know what? You could get off 10 arrows in a minute, and you could get off, if you had a muzzle-loading rifle, if you were good, you could get off 2 in a minute. So you tell me who had the upper hand. And, your accuracy with a muzzle loader was about 100 yards. You had the same accuracy with a bow and arrow. So tactics. Oh, let's do it. Hey, Marie, thank you. And by the way, Macintosh, Scotch-Irish name, and who played a big role in fighting for independence were not only the English Americans, but Scotch-Irish Americans. There were also black Americans that fought in the Revolutionary Army and the Continental Army. And so, Marie, we thank you and look forward to sending you a couple of mugs. That's a great thing. I love that. Thank you, everybody. And, I really appreciate the support and the love that comes from doing the show and knowing that there are people out there who are listening and care and enjoy it. And that's important to me. I don't know if it's important to you, Ken. Well, it's in the National Archives in Washington, D.C., and you can go see that. Now, they have the lights down low because the documents are starting to deteriorate from that era, and so it's all specialized lighting, and you walk in, and it's almost, I would say, a spiritual, religious experience. I'm not I don't believe in all that, but it really does grab you emotionally, and you walk around and see this, and there's also, I think one of the bigger copies that they sent to the king. They in those days it was like if you wanted to really make a point, you made a poster out of a letter, and then you wrapped that up and sent that forward. And there were, I think, the original printer, there were something like 25 copies still in existence, held by various governmental agencies, states, and federal government agencies, and I think there's 3 or 4 or 5 that are in private hands. The original handwritten document, I don't know if that still survives. I think it does. I think that's what it is in the National Archives. Fascinating to see that. If you get the chance, go see that. And yep. And so remember, when in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the... We're out of time. All right, I'm out here. I love you. Bye.